When I started calisthenics, I simply started doing push-ups, and there weren't many complications. The general idea was to do as many reps as I could each set, meaning reach failure and train hard. There was no need to rest a lot because even if I could only do a few reps, I was really light, and that meant that the load itself wasn't heavy, it was me who was weak. And I think many can agree that we all start this way, whether it be push-ups or pull-ups, we simply do as many reps as we can, resting maybe 1 or 2 minutes between sets. The general rule for beginners is get a better base, improve your joints and muscle conditioning, and get more muscle. You don't really need to think about your training because your body simply can't afford specific training yet. You can do exercises or loads that are heavy to the point that you can only do 3 reps per set, because as a beginner not only your form is not polished, your body awareness is also non-existent, and your joints are simply not accustomed to the exercise itself. In other words, the possibility of injuring yourself will be high. Every beginner is locked into training like every beginner, and that is great, because it means that you can simply do as many reps as you can per set, eat well, don't think a lot about training, and get results on strength and muscle simultaneously. Your body gets your newbie gains, and as a result of sedentarism, it hyper-responds to exercise. However, when you move away from exercises like pull-ups or dips and start maybe trying to get exercises like muscle-ups, you will soon realize that you cannot simply mindlessly train and get equally the same results on everything as you did in the beginning. And if you don't separate your strength training from your hypertrophy training or conditioning, or at least be aware of their differences, you will sabotage yourself when trying to get calisthenic skills. And I guess when it comes to absolute strength, this also applies to some extent. And it makes sense why beginners don't separate their training, because they simply don't have to. They get results by simply training the same on everything. When we start calisthenics, we do a few push-ups first, right? Then after a few days, we're able to do more reps. Then maybe after reaching 20 push-ups in a row, we have conditioned our joints and built a good amount of chest, shoulder, and tricep muscle. You feel stronger, more capable, and even reaching 20 push-ups grants you 2 reps on dips. And so there is a pattern here. We got better at push-ups by simply doing more reps and challenging your limits by reaching failure. In return, you got strength and muscle, and now you're able to do 2 reps of an exercise you didn't even train for. Essentially, you trained for muscle and got both muscle and strength. You expect to get results on everything by simply increasing the reps and reaching failure. The problem comes when you actually try to achieve skills that are inherently more challenging than a dip or a pull-up. And the more challenging it is, the more specific your training will need to be, which also means that other exercises will have less carryover on it. Not only that, but your expectations that simply reaching failure on an exercise will grant you results will make you ignorant of other training methods. More specifically, some strength training principles that everybody can simply test themselves. For a practical example, I can simply remember my journey with the muscle-up. Many YouTube tutorials recommend training explosive pull-ups to achieve the muscle-up. However, if the only context you have is that you should do explosive pull-ups, maybe like my past self, you're going to sabotage your training. If you put in this context a beginner that has got great results by simply training to failure and increasing reps, and you only tell him to do 4 sets of explosive pull-ups, he's going to miss some important nuance. Training to failure with plyometrics or explosive exercises don't really make sense to beginners. It's not like training to failure will give you less strength, it is simply that it will affect your future sets. If the beginner is only able to do 10 normal pull-ups in a row in his first set, then it is very likely that he will only be able to do 2 to 3 explosive pull-ups per set before the explosiveness decreases. However, if the beginner has in mind reaching failure on his explosive pull-ups, what is going to happen is that the set of supposedly explosive pull-ups will transition to conventional pull-ups, because as the beginner keeps repping the pull-ups, inevitably his strength will decrease, and with that, his potential of explosive pull-ups. This is because strength training, depending on the load, which is generally a very challenging load, requires a strength threshold that must require you to be fresh. If you are tired, you won't be able to be within that required strength threshold. You might as well not be able to do that exercise at all. This is worse for beginners because their strength is already low, but also because they are not aware of this. And on top of it, the load of calisthenic exercises can be decreased unless you use bands. When he reaches failure on his first set, the quality of his second set is going to be really bad. If you also apply to this the fact that he only rests 2 minutes between sets, then his strength training will be worse. When you compound this effect on every set, then his training will maybe not give him any significant results at all. In his this case, treating the explosive pull-ups differently than normal pull-ups will highly benefit him. For example, to do more work on explosive pull-ups, he might need to rest more between sets, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, or not reach failure. Do as little as 2 consistent reps per set. By resting more, he can have more reps with better form and quality. By not reaching failure, he can save a lot of strength for the next sets. Instead of instantaneously increasing the reps, he can increase his own input and make the pull-ups way more explosive, thus making it harder. You know, things like resting more between sets, 3 to 5 minutes or even more, or not reaching failure in all sets and saving up your strength for future sets might be something obvious for people that already know it. But for calisthenic beginners that can have a lot of progress in basic exercises, it's something you don't know until the way you always train doesn't work. And in a way I will say it is because the beginner doesn't separate his strength training and his other training. Not only because he's a beginner and thus he must train like one, but also because of the visual feedback and input that is not seen at all in some harder calisthenic exercises. For example, if you're going to train for absolute strength, when you move away from a 25-pound dumbbell to a 50-pound dumbbell, that is a huge increase. A significant difference that can also be seen and felt. For example, the 50-pound dumbbell is visually bigger, and when you hold it, you feel it. By just seeing the difference of the size itself, you get a visual feedback that you are holding a heavy weight and thus doing strength training. But there is no such visual feedback in calisthenics. For example, the only difference between an explosive pull-up and a pull-up is your own input. And this also applies to lever exercises. There is no tangible increase of your own body weight. It is simply the use of physics through a disadvantageous lever to increase the load. There is no tangible increase in the load of the exercise itself. It's not like a ball of weight appears on your stomach, so you can see that it is heavy. In a way, you need to be more mentally aware that you are doing strength training, and by being aware, you treat it as such and start resting more or saving your strength for future sets. Separating your strength training to other training is something that might appear obvious to people that already do it. However, it is a message that will definitely help a lot of calisthenic beginners.